Hello, everyone. This coming week we celebrate the holiday of Shavuot. On Shavuot, it is a tradition to read from the book of Ruth, recognizing the nobility of this special woman and how she maintained a loyalty to Judaism when she was not born within the Jewish faith. It has become a custom to highlight not only Ruth, but other notable Jewish women who have enriched Jewish life over the course of our history. So in a series of upcoming videos, I would like to highlight several Jewish women from the Bible and the rabbinic time, and we're going to start with Miriam, Moses' sister. I find that Miriam is not always favorably characterized by the Torah. Her characterization is, to me, not worthy of the woman she truly was, for a number of reasons. First of all, she is not introduced as Miriam until several chapters pass in the book of Exodus. In fact, when she is first mentioned, she is simply Moses' sister. She is not mentioned by name. Second, we know that when the people cross the Sea of Reeds and are finally liberated, Moses leads them in a song of joy. The Torah also details how Miriam led the women in a similar song, yet the version that is offered in the Torah is a truncated version of her song. There must have been a more extended song that she sang, part of the celebration, but the Torah omits it, and I find that being questionable as well. Finally, we know that later on in the Torah, Aaron and Miriam, Moses' brother and sister siblings, gossip about him and about the woman he married. Consequently, Miriam is stricken with this temporary skin disease. It is often referred to as leprosy, but it is something much more temporary. But Aaron is not. So why is it that Miriam is punished, but not Aaron? So for those reasons alone, I at times question the Torah's account of Miriam, and I feel that she deserved something better. My assessment here is that our sages, post-Torah sages, the sages of our Talmudic times and later on, recognize this omission, and they try to restore, in a sense, Miriam's nobility and reputation, enhanced it by a number of Jewish stories which demonstrated Miriam's greatness and why she was so central, not only to the formation of Am Yisrael, but to its survival. And so I'd like to share with you three brief elements, three brief texts of Jewish folklore demonstrating Miriam's greatness. And I'm going to read the text with you and then just offer some brief comments. The first text has to do with Moses' birth. We know that Pharaoh had decreed all firstborn males should be killed. And so when Moses was born, his mother puts him in a little ark over the water and hopes that he will be rescued by someone. Well, Miriam, again referred to as Moses' sister, stations herself, the Torah says she stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall him. In other words, Miriam was there kind of watching over Moses to make sure that nothing happens. And in fact, when Pharaoh's daughter discovers Moses, it is Miriam who walks up to her, approaches her, and says, I can find you a Hebrew nurse who will nurse Moses on your behalf. And Miriam does this, and she goes and she fetches her mother, Yocheved, and identifies her mother as this Hebrew nurse, but she doesn't reveal Yocheved's identity to Pharaoh's daughter, and she doesn't reveal her own identity. In other words, she very simply acts as a concerned person who goes and makes sure that that there is somebody to nurse Moses, but she doesn't reveal anything about their Hebrew identity. And this is something that that Jewish folklore will highlight as being representative of Miriam's unique personality. The first text again highlights this role that Miriam played watching over Moses at birth. And I'm going to read part of the text. Miriam prophesied, and this is really important because Miriam is identified now as a prophet. The rabbis do connect her standing by the riverbank with her being a prophet. Miriam prophesied that her mother would give birth to a son who would deliver Israel. When Moses was born and the house was filled with light, Amram, their father, rejoiced and praised Miriam because her prophecy had come to pass. However, once Moses was cast into the river, Amram charged her with making a false prediction. So in other words, Miriam's father first praises her and then reneges when Amram sees that Moses is floating in the water and his life is put in jeopardy. Therefore, Miriam stood at a distance by the riverbank to know whether her prophecy would be fulfilled. So now we're going to go on, shifting a little bit. The rabbis assert that Miriam was rewarded for waiting by the riverbank for a short time to learn what would befall Moses. Her reward was greater than her deeds several times over. For when, and now they're going to make a connection to the last of the texts that I addressed, that of the gossip which led to Miriam's skin affliction. And listen to this carefully. For when she contracted a skin affliction, the tzara'at, which is commonly but incorrectly known as leprosy, the ark, the Shekhinah, that is to say God's divine presence, the priests, the Levites, and all Israel waited for her for 7 days until she was healed. The rabbis note Miriam's speed in calling her mother Yocheved to nurse Moses, and her wisdom in concealing from the daughter of Pharaoh that she was the infant's sister. Now, just stopping a moment to take a look at, to comment briefly on this particular text. First, again, Miriam was so venerated by Jewish tradition, she was referred to as a Nevi'ah. We say Miriam HaNevi'ah, Miriam the Prophet. And we know that attaining that level of distinction is rare in Jewish tradition. And here was a Jewish woman, a biblical woman, even in a time when the force and the influence of men was so overwhelming. Miriam was defined as a prophet according to our tradition. And it was validated at first by her father when Miriam's prophecy came true about Moses being born. And even then, when the validation is reversed, when Amram has reservations about Miriam's prophecy because Moses' life hangs in the balance, what does Miriam do? She goes to stand by the riverbank to ensure Moses' survival. She displays exceptional concern, even though her presence might arouse suspicion among all the Egyptians. After all, why is Miriam there? Just coincidentally, she happens to be around and she just coincidentally recommends a nurse. The fact that she was there, that she remained there, that she looked out for Moses was an indication of her exceptional character, and she is considered so worthy of praise. Finally, in connection with the theme of the skin affliction, tzara'at, we know that one who was afflicted with the skin disease had to be quarantined. And here was Miriam, who was singled out for punishment and therefore had to be isolated. But despite her isolation, I think this is a remarkable text which demonstrates the physical and the spiritual bonding of the people during the time that she is isolated. Try to imagine somebody in a hospital. Usually when a person is in a hospital, maybe in an emergency room or during an operation, a pregnancy, what might be, there are a few members of the family who are there keeping watch. We now imagine an entire community keeping watch, because that's really what was reflective of this time of quarantine. So revered was Miriam, according to this text, that not only the common people stood watch, but the priests and the Levites, the ritual elite of the people, they stood watch. And even further, the text claims that Miriam was so honored and respected that the ark and even God, the divine presence, were there keeping watch. It suggests that even though this punishment might have been inevitable, however we want to understand it, nevertheless, God was so concerned about Miriam's health that God, as it were, stood guard. God was there in the emergency room awaiting information about Miriam's recovery. That's how unique Miriam was, and how the rabbis understood her role as one of the great central leaders of Israel. And then to kind of put a cap on all of this, they describe her as being a woman of great wisdom. And her wisdom was reflected in how she went about finding Yocheved. As soon as the daughter of Pharaoh discovered Moses, Miriam was there on the spot. She went immediately to find her mother and to place her mother in the role of nurse. And Miriam, again, did not reveal Yocheved's identity. She did not reveal her identity. There was something just so sparkling about what she did and how she did it, and that, again, calls attention to Miriam's greatness. So that's text number 1. The second text has to do with the sea. Remember, I mentioned that there's a truncated version of Miriam's song in leading the women at the sea. Here's text number 2. The rabbis praised Miriam's great trust in God and steadfast faith, which are reflected in the very fact of Miriam's having a timbrel in her hand. What the text doesn't tell us in the Torah is how Miriam got the timbrel. It says that she had a timbrel and she led the women in this celebration, but from where did the timbrel come? How did she know to have a timbrel? They just crossed the sea. So here's how the rabbis explain in the text. They ask, whence did the Israelites have timbrels for dancing in the wilderness? Where did those timbrels come from? Rather, the righteous trusted in God. They knew that God would perform miracles and mighty acts when they would go forth from Egypt, and they prepared for themselves timbrels and dancing. So what we learn from this text is that Miriam not only was a prophet, Miriam was not only an exceptional leader, but Miriam was a quintessential person of faith. She had such faith in God's justice that even while in Egypt, even during the course of the slavery, before the liberation took place, Miriam anticipated God's justice. She anticipated that there would be a celebration. And what makes this remarkable is that Israel's future was still uncertain, and the Israelites themselves were dubious about their liberation. Even when they began to flee from the Egyptians and the Egyptians started to pursue them, they expressed reservation and doubt and fear. Would they succeed? Miriam knew this from the outset without any reservations whatsoever, and therefore she was the quintessential role model, and her faith personified someone who was a lover of God, and loved God just as passionately as did her brother Moses. Again, a woman of complete faith and confidence in God, even during the most challenging moments of Israel's existence, when Israel's survival and formation as a nation was still in doubt. Finally, we come to what is known as Miriam's well. When Miriam dies, the Torah simply narrates that she dies. In the very next verse, after describing or detailing her death, is a verse talking about or describing how the people had no water to drink. So Moses dies, and the very next verse juxtaposed with this was a verse narrating how Israel had no water to drink. And from this, the rabbis developed the idea of the notion of a well that was present in the wilderness, a well that was owned and maintained by Miriam. Through this well, Miriam nourished the people, and when Miriam died, that well disappeared. And just again to read a brief section about from a text concerning the well. The Midrash lists the well among the 3 gifts that were given to Israel by merit of their leaders. The manna was given on account of Moses, the pillar of cloud by merit of Aaron, and the well by merit of Miriam. So what we learned was that not only did the rabbis describe a well, but this well was one of the most important objects. It was something which was considered a unique and a holy gift, one of the rare gifts given, and it is put on a level of sanctity almost unparalleled by anything else. So again, we have the rabbis embellishing the story of Miriam by offering this idea of a well. And it's not really just a myth or a legend, I think, in their minds. This was a seminal statement about Miriam's central role in the creation and in the survival of Yisrael. From this teaching, we learn how central Miriam was as a leader. She nourished the people through this well, and when she died, the well no longer existed. So again, rabbinic lore offers the idea that Miriam was this venerated leader, without which Israel would not have existed. So I think by virtue of all of these stories, it's fitting that today many of us on the Seder table put a kos Miriam, a cup of water, which is called kos Miriam. It's Miriam's cup, and it symbolizes the well by which Miriam nourished the people. And why we do this? We have an Elijah's cup. Elijah is not just recognized as a prophet, but really he's symbol for a future time of peace. Aside from that, in some of our Haggadah versions, Moses is briefly mentioned, but there are no other human beings. But Miriam is deserving of a place on the Seder people, because without Miriam, the story never would have taken place. We would never be sitting down at a Seder table, honoring our past and the continuity of the Jewish people without Miriam's courage, her foresight, her ability to lead the people in exceptional ways, paralleled perhaps only by her brother Moses. And I think these texts call attention to the greatness of this woman, and a reason why our Seder would be incomplete without Miriam being represented, because Miriam's well was not just a matter of Miriam nourishing people with water, but Miriam essentially nourishing the souls of Israel and ensuring that Israel would survive and that we would be here today to honor her in our generation. So in anticipation of Shavuot, Chag Sameach, everyone.